Hi everyone, welcome back to my author commentary for Prince of Song and Shade. Today we're up to chapter 14, which is a really rich scene between Talyn and the Shadowhawk. Not necessarily much happens, but there are a lot of layers and things happening in the scene, so I'm keen to jump right into it. We start the chapter with Cuinn waiting for Talyn in the middle of the Pol Quarter, obviously garbed up as the Shadowhawk. He's requested a meeting with her. We spent a little bit of that first paragraph just talking about the smell, the feeling, the sensation, the humidity. And again, that's me trying to kind of add to that world building piece to try and essentially make the feeling of being in Dock City, in the Pol Quarter in particular, almost a character of its own, where you, as the reader, can hopefully be immersed in those smells and that stickiness and that stink. So you feel part of the story. So hopefully that's something that works and that you feel, but that's a real effort on my part to try and kind of bring you into what that's like. Particularly, as a Shadowhawk standing there, he's got these wings, massive wings curled up against his back. He's got a massive cloak over them to hide those wings, to help his glamour hide the wings. So he must be incredibly hot and uncomfortable and sticky and itchy, and breathing in that stench. It just must be absolutely miserable. Yet this is something that Shadowhawk goes out night after night after night and immerses himself in because he wants to help. And as when you read this book and you read the Shadowhawk's reflections on where he is and what he's doing, he never complains about this. He barely even mentions it. So an interesting, again, insight into the Shadowhawk and how determined he is and how deeply he cares, that these discomforts don't even really factor into what he's doing. And then Talyn actually shows up, and Cuinn, poor Cuinn, is almost overwhelmed by the fact that she meant it. She's come back to Myth-Raynar, she's offered to help him, and now she's actually shown up to a meeting, and he's so delighted. There's a part of him that's so hungry for that partnership, that friendship, that help with what he's doing, so he's not always dragging this weight alone. But he also knows at the same time that there's something else there. We get a little bit of his reflection of that very first meeting between them on her return. He definitely felt that pain and he feels that viscerally, but he also saw underneath that he's a very powerful song mage. He can not just read emotions well, but he can interpret them very skillfully, and he knows there's something underneath that there's something she's hiding. And he knows that means he can't trust her fully, even though he desperately, desperately wants to. And so he holds himself back a little bit, but he does find that hard. He's just so overjoyed that she's there. And then he gives her a bit of a rundown on why he's asked her for help. The investigation that he was running prior to her departure from A Tale of Stars and Shadow, the investigation into vengeance. And at the mention of vengeance, he sees that reaction, right? So Talyn is a masterful... she's masterful at hiding herself and her reactions, but again, this is the most powerful song mage in Myth-Raynar, and he sees that spark inside her at the mention of vengeance. That only increases his suspicion because she immediately pretends like she didn't and knows nothing about it, and he knows that's a lie. So again, these layers and layers. He desperately wants her to help. She's definitely there to help, but he can't really discern to what degree is helping and what degree is whatever else is going on with her. And for self-preservation, he needs to, survival instinct, he needs to keep himself alive and safe if he wants to continue what he's doing. We also get an interesting look from Cuinn's perspective on what you kind of see in Talyn when she's talking to Sari. So there's an obvious moment in that conversation where her eyes kind of go distant and she almost looks over her shoulder, and that's her in her head talking to Sari. And he gets to see what that is, and he feels that kind of weird dissonance inside her where it's not just Talyn there, it's also Sari, and he obviously doesn't know what it is. But from our perspective, this first time we kind of get to see that interestingly. He then hides the fact that he himself has received an overt threat from vengeance. He keeps that from her, interestingly. But then after this interaction, she kind of heads off and he thinks she's leaving, but she sticks around to ask his advice. Her interaction or her chat with Theak in the chapter before this one, where he was kind of cavalier about what happens to the human servants up at the Citadel and the way the wingfolk, or some of the wingfolk, treat them, is really weighing on her. And she asks him for advice, which is interesting, but it's clear in that scene she kind of sees him as someone who gives a shit as much as she did, for want of a better term. Whereas even Theak is kind of like, we can't change this, we have to let that go. She knows that that's not the reaction she's going to get from the Shadowhawk, and so she asks him for advice, and he actually gives her some pretty good advice, which, as we know, that she actually carries out and implements. So again, if she was strictly there for the mission, this is not something she'd be bringing up with him or relating with him. Sorry, asking him for help with, but she is, which indicates or gives a strong indication, as I've said, she's not really just there for the mission. There's something about the Shadowhawk that really draws her in, even though she's not really sure what that is. And it's that Demorix connection. When he's the Shadowhawk, and that connection is not as hidden by Cuinn's false playboy persona. She's so quick to dismiss him when he's in that persona because she's so disgusted by it. But as the Shadowhawk, that connection comes across loud and clear, and so she trusts him in a way that she wouldn't otherwise necessarily. So yeah, a lot of layers to that conversation, a really interesting one, a really fun one to write. If you've got any more questions about that or anything that I've talked about, as always, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to answer. Otherwise, I can't wait to see you in the next chapter. I hope you have a great day. Bye.